How can we maximize the chance that we will live a long and healthy life? Can we trust Peter Attia? I'm Dr. Chad Swanson, and I'm on a journey to understand and transform our health system. I'm also an emergency physician. Dr. Peter Attia is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Outlive. He's an expert in longevity, and I recently finished the book. I'd like to share my thoughts. A bit of a disclaimer first. I am not an expert in longevity. I'm also not going to give a rigorous or comprehensive review of the book or even my thoughts of it. You can get that online. My purpose in creating these videos, and really my passion in life, is to contribute to or catalyze transformational change. So I take a bird's eye view. I do have an expertise in emergency medicine. I won't be talking about that too much, just giving my personal insights occasionally. And then I'm also an expert on the lives of two physicians who lived in Raleigh, North Carolina in the 1890s. One's name was Lawson Scruggs. I gave a TEDx talk about that. But other than that, I also have a master's in public health, so I have some superficial knowledge and perspective in population health. I have some knowledge about complex adaptive systems, so a way of viewing the world when there's a number of interacting and adapting people and organizations. I've published academic papers about that topic, and I have a superficial knowledge of the history of medicine in general. So what I'd like to do is identify forces in our health system today. Peter Attia in his book is one of those forces, and then approach that topic with a bird's eye view and consider how it influences our health system today. So we're in a time, as we all know, when there is an abundance of information. Knowledge is at our fingertips with our phones. And part of our challenge, a major challenge that we have, is the ability to identify and consider and really hone in on what information can we trust and what information can we not trust and to what degree. So I'll go ahead and say it outright. I do recommend Peter Attia's book, and I do trust him with a few caveats. So here are just a few factors that I consider if I come across an author or an expert that help me to determine whether I can trust her or him. First, do they give context to their recommendations? So are they considering the individual person, the environment, etc.? Do they speak in absolute? So Peter Attia, in his interviews that I've listened to, which are just a few, will generally state something with reservation. So this is what I recommend given the current state of the data as I understand it. Third, and similarly, does she or he change when the data changes? So I'll talk about this in a bit, but Dr. Attia used to strongly recommend the keto diet, evidently, for everyone, and he's since changed his position. Do they say, I don't know? And he does say that. Are there positions based on science? So a hierarchy so many will refer to a scientific study, but there's a hierarchy of evidence, and there might be 10 other studies that demonstrate something different. So just because someone mentions a scientific study does not necessarily mean that it's strong evidence. And then finally, does the expert have a conflict of interest? So Dr. Attia does have evidently some financial conflicts of interest, and you can find online some criticism about his relationship with the Aurora, I believe it is, O-U-R-A ring, which is a ring that helps to give data on your sleep activity. So I did enjoy the book. I do recommend it for many, but let me just share my thoughts about it. I've looked on the internet for some reviews that seem to share my perspective, and I've come across a review by a physician that I respect and that I've read some of his stuff recently. His name's Graham Walker. He's an emergency physician in California, I believe, with Kaiser. But But I have no relationship with Dr. Walker or Dr. Attia. So I will provide a link to this review. It's titled A Skeptic's Review of Peter Attia's Outlive. It was published in January of 2024. So let me just share a few thoughts here. Boiling down Dr. Attia's basic message, he says in his book that there are no or very few shortcuts in life, and to truly achieve health or wellness or longevity, you've got to put in work, time, and effort. The often American desire for a pill for everything simply will not cut it. And then Dr. Walker gives a few other themes from Attia. Our genes and biology have not kept up with our environment, plentiful and highly processed food and sedentary lifestyle. Second key theme, preventing or delaying inevitable disease is way better and cheaper than treating or managing it. Third, exercise is critical to everything. We all need frequent strength and cardio exercise. So this is a theme that comes up throughout the book, that if there's one intervention that's the most important, whether it be diet or sleep or medications or surgery or supplements, it's by far, according to Dr. Attia, exercise. The culture of medicine is still in a treat the disease mindset. Attia argues it must pivot to a prevent the disease instead. So he talks about, and I love this historical perspective, he talks about medicine 1.0, which was before the time that medicine incorporated scientific theories and ideas from the 1840s to the early 1900s. And that era lasted over 1,000 years with Hippocrates, and it was largely based on observations and then supported with essentially guesswork. And then medicine 2.0, which is the dominant approach now, is an approach based on medical treatment. And then finally, medicine 3.0, according to Dr. Attia, is the time when prevention is prevention for a healthy lifespan is the key goal or mission. I would state that our current paradigm is based on treatment. I agree with that, but also elitism and profit, and that we should shift more, for medicine 3.0, to use his terms, towards an equitable and efficient health system for all. So his focus in his book is primarily on a patient-doctor relationship, and realistically, it's primarily for wealthy patients or people with a tremendous amount of motivation and or privilege and or resources, and we'll talk about why that's the case. So the core central features of all the solutions boil down to common, simple things that medicine spends little time on: exercise, diet, sleep, stress reduction, and mental health. So Dr. Graham gives a few criticisms. Most of Dr. Attia's medical recommendations are not accessible to the vast majority of Americans, and if anything, his patients are going to be generally way healthier than the average American, as they can afford his $150,000 annual fee. I've seen that amount multiple times on the internet, that he charges $150,000 a year. I can't confirm that, but that just, if it's true, it highlights his focus is really on the wealthy. But there are important takeaways for everyone, I think. So, a second criticism, he frequently talks about how the environment of humans has changed quite rapidly, but doesn't recognize that these are systemic structural problems that could be addressed in American society. I agree with that 100%. A third criticism, if anything, I think Peter Attia expects too much of individual doctors and individual patients. So I agree with Dr. Walker here as well, that there needs to be a systems transformation. Though starting with the doctor-patient relationship could be a leverage point or a catalyst for transforming the rest of the system. Okay, so Dr. Attia wrote, Medicine 3.0 depends much more from you, the patient. You must be well informed, medically literate to a reasonable degree, clear-eyed about your goals, and cognizant of the true nature of risk. You must be willing to change ingrained habits, accept new challenges, and venture outside of your comfort zone if necessary. You are always participating, never passive. He said that we need to focus more on the quality of life years that you're healthy doing the things you want. So this is lifespan versus a health span. Dr. Attia said, I now consider exercise to be the most potent longevity drug in our arsenal in terms of lifespan and health span. The data are unambiguous. Exercise not only delays actual death, but also prevents both cognitive and physical decline better than any other intervention. And just a personal note, over the last 3 or 4 months, I've begun or have been involved in an exercise routine that really works for me. I'll probably be sharing that in a future video. And so I've lived the positive benefits of regular intense exercise. And it just seems to be an increased sense of well-being and a higher level of energy. So Dr. Attia, in his book, focuses on biological pathways in a way that is, it seems to be an overemphasis on biological pathways. So he also has recommendations for technologies that may be either inaccessible or very difficult for most of us. He recommends a DEXA fat scan on his patients annually and a 2-hour glucose test. And so if this were to be widely adopted, it would drastically increase the cost of our healthcare. All right, so continuing Dr. Walker's review here. So Dr. Attia said in his book, the good news is that we have tremendous agency over our health. Changing how we exercise, what we eat, and how we sleep can completely turn the tables in our favor. The bad news is that these things require effort to escape the default modern environment that has conspired against our ancient and formerly helpful fat-storing genes by overfeeding, undermoving, and undersleeping us all. So the 4 horsemen of chronic disease, he calls them, are metabolic dysfunction, diabetes and related problems, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and neurodegenerative disease. So those are 4 things that we need to avoid. So he talks about how Medicine 2.0 looks at relatively short-term markers and metrics. So a 10-year risk, when really we should be looking at maybe a 30-year risk, which sounds reasonable. Okay, he talks about he argues, I'm going to read from Dr. Walker's review again. He argues that we focus too much on LDL and HDL while missing out on an important component called ApoB. ApoB may predict cardiovascular risk even better than LDL in several studies. So he tests all his patients for ApoB as well as LPA, a component of ApoB. So here's Dr. Attia. Considering the following example, we know that smoking is causally linked to lung cancer. Should we tell someone to stop smoking only after their 10-year risk of lung cancer reaches a certain threshold? That is, do we think it's okay for people to stop smoking until they are 65 and then quit? Or should we do everything we can to help young people who have maybe just picked up the habit quit altogether? Okay, so then he goes on to talk about cancer. Dr. Walker says Dr. Attia's 4 arguments are that it's probably the hardest of the 4 horsemen to prevent. It probably won't be cured in our lifetime. Immunotherapy is a groundbreaking approach to treating cancer. And while he supports earlier screening and detection, he acknowledges that tests are not perfect and that false positives are a thing. He then goes on to dementia, and quoting Dr. Attia, the best interpretation I can draw from the literature suggests that at least 4 sessions per week of at least 20 minutes per session. So he's talking about saunas here. At 179 degrees Fahrenheit or hotter seems to be the sweet spot to reduce the Alzheimer's by about 65%. So I'm not aware of that evidence, and that's certainly not something that everyone would have access to, frequent saunas. All right, exercise is the next topic that he talks about, and like I said before, he says that it's the most important intervention. He talks about the need to focus on a VO2 max, which is how much oxygen your body can use when it's going at its hardest. And so he recommends a type of high intensity interval training where we push our bodies to nearly a fast sprint for maybe 4 minutes and then rest for 4 minutes and do that 4 times. He does stress the importance of working up to that level for about 6 months if we haven't been exercising. He also stresses the importance of strength training and doing it with proper form, and the importance of grip strength. So Dr. Walker in this review, which I'll provide a link for, goes into detail about the specifics of that. And then finally, he talks about nutrition. So he states that the evidence around nutrition is generally quite poor. Like I stated early on this video, early in his career, he recommended keto diets for everyone, but he's since changed his mind. And he essentially recommends a low-carb diet with adequate protein. All right, then he goes on to talking about the importance of sleep. I did a separate video on this as an emergency doctor who works nights. This is something that has been a significant issue for me. So while pills and chemicals might provide some temporary help, really it's about sleep hygiene. So ensuring that we go to sleep and wake up at the same time, ensuring that our room is completely dark, minimize noises, minimize interruptions, minimize alcohol use and screen use prior to going to sleep. And then finally, Dr. Attia finishes his book by sharing really some striking and engaging details about his personal life. So essentially, without providing too many details, he was a very driven person. He graduated from Stanford and Johns Hopkins and finished a very rigorous surgery training. And he'd always focused on his physical well-being and exercised really intensely. And yet his emotional and relationships, his emotional well-being and relationships took a back seat. And so he stressed the importance at the end of his book of considering the why of our lives. So why do we live? We live for the people that we have relationships with, that we love and care for, and we live for experiences and memories. And so it makes no sense to put all of our work into our bodies being healthy if our emotions and mental well-being is not healthy as well. So I agree with that 100%. So I hope that this review was helpful. I'd like your thoughts if you've read Outlive or if you have experience with Dr. Attia's work, and thank you.